You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We've got another loaded show here. College football kicking into high gear. We're getting into crunch time. We're getting closer and closer to November. And as that month gets closer and closer, the games mean more and more and more. Another big slate of college football action this Saturday. So let's get started here with Saturday scouting. I'm going to catch up with Ben Fennell. Had a big matchup out in the Big Ten this week. We'll get his thoughts there and find out where he's going, heading back to SEC country this weekend. So we'll talk all about that with Ben. After that, this is a treat. I love anytime we can get some thoughts from Greg Cosell, my friend from NFL Films. You know you always catch him every week on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast. Well, this week he's going to join us here on the Journey to the Draft to talk about some of the top skill position players around the country. Then we will catch up with Tony Pauline and Draft Buzz, get some of the latest word on the street around the country when it comes to some of the top prospects in the NFL draft. And then we'll wrap it up with my notes on one of the top players for this Florida defense. Really impressed me, this group overall, this whole Florida team left this past week against LSU. We're going to talk about Jabari Zuniga. A little bit dinged up right now, but a guy that I think a lot of people are going to really like as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. And then we'll wrap this thing up with Draft Mailbag, your questions at home. But let's get things started here with Saturday Scouting and Ben Fennell.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, back for another edition here of Saturday Scouting is the one and only Ben Fennell. You can follow him on Twitter at BenFennell_NFL. That is Fennell with 2 N's and 2 L's. Ben, welcome back, sir.
It's good to be back.
Yeah.
Little Midwest trip out to the Big Ten.
How was the trip?
It was okay. You know, the Midwest this time of year is a little cold, a little gray. Yeah, it was down 30 degrees on game day morning. And
no snow, though?
No snow. Not yet.
Flurries?
Not yet.
All right. Well,
it's coming, though.
Let's get right in because we've got a lot to talk about here today. You saw Michigan versus Illinois.
Yep.
Big win for the Wolverines. Game ball. Who you got?
Well, before that, to be perfectly honest, I was a little disappointed.
Ooh.
There's a lot of guys that didn't play.
Who didn't play?
Hill, out. Nico Collins, out. Kwity Paye, out. True freshman Daxton Hill, Don Brown and Jim Harbaugh said was the fastest player they've ever coached. Got him to flip from Alabama.
Out.
Didn't play.
Yep.
So I was excited to watch all these players and didn't get the chance to see them.
I'm sorry.
But there was still a lot of talent on the field.
I want to lay this out there. I saw exactly one noon game, and it was the game that I was at. I was at Temple, Memphis, so I literally know nothing about how this game went other than that Michigan won comfortably.
All right, so I'm just going to lie the rest of this podcast,
Perfect.
and we'll see
what
everybody
else
you can even call me out on.
You can call them out. All
right. But the game ball, I got to go to Michigan defense. They had 4 sacks, 12 TFLs. Jordan Glasgow, the last of the Glasgow brothers, had a block punt.
Is he definitely the last?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't know. They have like a factory of them back there. He plays a lot like Winovich. Kind of looks like him, has a hair going, flies all around the field, plays special teams. Josh Uche, 5 TFLs, 3 sacks.
5 TFLs in the game. Wow.
He led the team in sacks last year, even though they had Chase Winovich and Rashawn Gary. So let's not sleep on this kid. He's probably the best prospect. I think he's a really versatile, interesting piece. I think defense coordinators are going to be interested. He's not going to play any sort of even front defensive end.
Okay.
He's an undersized outside linebacker that you're going to come work in some pressure packages.
So is he Anthony Barr?
He could be. Not as big as Anthony Barr. Anthony Barr is kind of a stallion. He's big. He's broad. He's a little bit squattier than that, but a really interesting player with a variety of moves. You can line him in at 3-tech, the edge, pressure packages. He can play off ball. He's athletic. He's explosive. Just an interesting player. I'm just really interested to see how he tests.
So hybrid,
in the offseason.
not a tweener.
Yeah, I would go hybrid. I like him, so he's a hybrid. Khaliki Hudson, big QB hit, PBU, all over the field, playing hang defender, safety, inside linebacker, dime backer, all over the field. Fun player to watch. So
he's
game ball, just the entire defense.
So Khaliki Hudson is where we didn't talk about him last week. He's very similar. He's kind of like that. He doesn't play the same role all the time as Isaiah Simmons, who we've talked about in recent weeks, but that kind of player.
It's that style of player, and they're going to be polarizing and interesting conversations because they don't fit the mold for their positions. He's 6 foot 220, playing down in the box about 90% of the time.
What's he do best?
That's the question.
Yeah.
Using his athleticism in tight quarters, and he's a tough kid. He's a good blitzer. He's a bit of a drag down tackler because of his size in the trenches there. But I don't really know what he's going to be at the next level.
Yeah.
Kind of a box safety, and we'll see if he's got enough weight on him to hang.
Yeah, he's one of those players that I watch, and kind of what we talked about with Isaiah Simmons and others, where I'm like, all right, well, I get the idea. The idea of him makes sense to me, but we haven't seen him do anything that makes me think, oh, like that's translatable
and he's
to play
playing
linebacker.
the Jabril Peppers Viper role in Don Brown's defense, which it's a little bit of everything.
Yep.
And it's going to be the same thing as Peppers in that he's a really interesting athlete, been on the field a ton.
Yep.
Good kid on the field, off the field, the whole thing, good in the locker room.
Yep.
What do you do with him at the next level?
Right.
And we saw Jabril Peppers kind of struggle to find his way in Cleveland. Seems like the New York Giants have a better role for him. I haven't seen a whole lot in 2019, but from what I've heard, they have a bit of a more box safety type of role for him.
Yeah, it's he's one of those guys. It's going to be very interesting to kind of follow. He is a senior, so we'll be entering the NFL next year. All right, let's go to your one-play takeaway. What one play stands out for you in this game?
Yeah, and just going right off the game ball, the Michigan defense, the first play of the game.
Okay.
Illinois ran this counter gun run play, and it just got blown up from every which way and every gap. You had Mike Dana in there, Josh Uche, Kaliki Hudson. Everybody's in the backfield, penetration everywhere. And when you look at the last 3 games after they got gashed by Wisconsin for 300 yards on the ground, 250 from Jonathan Taylor. Illinois this week, 43 carries, 64 yards. The previous week, Iowa, 30 carries, 1 rushing yard. Against Iowa. That was big time. I know the sack yards minus in the rushing totals in college. And the week before, Rutgers, 29 carries, 46 yards. Dominant run defense the last 3 weeks since that Wisconsin game.
I was going to say,
what you expect from a Michigan defense. So they definitely buckled down after that game, and we'll see if they keep it going.
Did the running back from Illinois, Reggie Corbin, did he do anything in this game?
He looks different this year, and I'm not sure what it is. There's some rumblings that he's not all about the contact. He's trying to preserve himself a little bit. He knows the team isn't that competitive this year, a little bit afraid of injury, just not running as hard, and they're cutting back on some of his carries, starting to work in some younger guys, so a little disappointed to see his senior season go this way.
Yeah, that's tough to hear. All right, let's go. Off the bus guy, who impressed you physically in person?
There was a couple guys, just hanging around the tight ends and the O-line. You had Big John Runyon Jr., you had Ben Bredesen. The offensive line is a really good-looking group. But this Sean McKeon, the tight end, senior tight end there, is a really good-looking kid. He looks like he's 6'5", 245, 250, moves really well, good blocker, decent hands. They don't feature the tight end a whole lot in Michigan, but interesting player that I think may intrigue some people at the next level. Almost like the way Foster Moreau is kind of coming on in Oakland right now.
Yep.
I can see Sean McKeon kind of being a mid to late round player that has more upside in the next level.
He popped on my radar, I think his freshman or sophomore year. He put up some pretty good numbers in the offseason.
Yep.
And that kind of came across my desk, and I saw that, and I said, all right, well, this guy, I'll kind of file away.
Yeah, exactly.
Now he's,
I think Jim Nagy profiled him a couple weeks ago in a pregame, just saying, hey, he's a senior, good-looking kid, and definitely on the Senior Bowl watch list.
Interesting. All right, well, let's go now to a guy that's not eligible for this year's draft, and that is someone that you will tab as your down-the-road freak show for this game.
Man, this sophomore linebacker for Michigan, Cameron McGrone, is an interesting player. He is playing the Devin Bush role, but in a much different package. Bush was this squatty, rocked-up guy that played in a phone booth. McGrone's got these long limbs, long arms. He's only 6'1", but he looks much longer. And he's got these high-cut, long legs that can roam side to sideline, swoops in and over blocks. Had 11 tackles, 8 solo, a forced fumble. He had a play where the quarterback was trying to get out, grabbed the quarterback's hand, yanked him back, poked the ball out, made plays out to the numbers all day. He's a blitzer on third down. He's got range. Filed that name away. He's 6'1", 235, and moves well, sophomore. Cameron McGrone, number 44, there playing Devin Bush role.
Yeah. Interesting.
I didn't either. He's a guy that just stood out on tape and just watching the game like, 44 again. There's 44 again. 44 again. Next thing you know, I'm buzzing my producer. I got a McGrone package for you. Who's McGrone? It's this linebacker making all these plays on the field. So that's kind of the nature of my job with ESPN. You're watching the game, just seeing where the game takes you. And any theme or anything that keeps reoccurring, suddenly it's something to talk about in a storyline. Let's see if we could build a video package and sell it and give this kid some love.
I like it. All right, well, let's get to some of these other games because, as I mentioned, I didn't watch any of the noon games. I did get home for the later games, and the all eyes for me were on Florida versus LSU, the kind of the highlight game of the weekend. Did not disappoint. It was a really, really fun game. I thought Florida handled themselves very well. I figured LSU would win comfortably, but Florida, I didn't think was going to be ready to kind of go into the bayou and at night and that kind of atmosphere. They showed up very well. Give a lot of credit to Dan Mullen and that staff. Just a couple things for me. The game ball, I think you got to give it to Joe Burrow in this game, and that offense, they continue to just execute at such a high level. He looks poised. accurate throws left and right. The timing is really good, unflappable. And I know the defensive front, they were a little bit undermanned. Jabari Zuniga isn't all the way back yet. He played a little bit in the game. Jonathan Grenard was out for very early in this game. But, Burrow, the stat, Ben. And, when I'm watching the games on Saturdays, I don't watch with a keen eye on, let me watch this matchup or this player. I just want to watch the game, enjoy it, kind of let it wash over me. Whoever stands out, and I might look at stats later.
Right.
I go back and I look at this box score later, this LSU-Florida box score. LSU had 4 third downs on offense. Not third down conversions.
Wow.
Third downs, period.
Doing something right on first and second down, I can tell you what.
Wild. That is one of the craziest stats I've seen so far in college football. For the amount of possessions they had to have just 4 third downs, to me, was insane. Burrow's playing at a really high level.
I guess that could mean a number of things. You're either very productive on first and second down, or you're turning that ball over on first and second down.
Which they weren't doing that.
Never getting a third down. So it's got to be one or the other. But LSU's offense, really efficient this year. And I got to credit their offensive line.
Yeah.
They don't have a whole lot of names, not a whole lot of NFL prospects.
Sure.
And those names in draft circles right now, but they held this Florida defense to 0 sacks, 1 QB hit. That's Zuniga, who's a little dinged up, John Greenard in there, some other guys up front. They like to blitz as well in that Todd Grantham pressure scheme. So really impressive job from the LSU offensive line and the quarterback in managing the protections, managing the pocket, and first and foremost, getting the ball out of his hands. Joe Burrow is not going to sit back there as a lame duck.
He's not.
And he's going to get that ball out or get himself out of there. And I just think he does a really good job managing the game from the pocket.
So I will give a little bit of credit to Florida's defense, though. They did hold them to just 25% on third down. So they were just 1 of 4.
There you go. Yeah.
There's that. But the third down attempts, just crazy. All right.
And just a perspective of how Florida started the season against Miami.
Yeah.
13 sacks, 20 hurries, 7 QB hits.
That's wild.
In addition.
Yeah.
They got after it to start the year, and they've been kind of that type of defense ever since. Until LSU really did a good job against that pressure.
No question. And those receivers continue to make plays for Joe Burrow. The one play takeaway was from the game that I was at. Isaiah Wright, the senior wide receiver for Temple, who I believe Gil Brandt had named him as his #1 kick returner and return specialist coming into the year in the senior class. He's got that dynamic quality. Has returned, I believe, 3 or 4, maybe more than that, punt returns.
Was he returning kicks last year as well?
Yes, he was.
Interesting.
I
watched him, and I have a comp for him. Now I'm afraid to say it because it's not a returner style player.
Well, no, I want to hear it.
I think I wrote down Jordan Matthews.
Okay.
Because I think he plays that bigger slot role.
He does
for
play
Temple's
the bigger
offense.
slot, yes. He's not. That's the thing is that when you watch him, he's not explosive. He's not like look at this guy go.
In full disclosure, I did not watch his special teams. So if he was returning kicks and had some explosive gear and good in the open field and special teams, I was not seeing that on offense. But I also haven't watched him in 2019. But I remember buzzing through him last year. I'm not sure why. Somebody told me to watch him, but. I think I had Jordan Matthews, but don't quote me on that.
Well, he had a jet sweep for a touchdown in this game, and that's kind of how they use him, Temple. They do a lot of different gadgety stuff with him. I would say he's up and down at the catch point because I did watch a little bit of film on him before Saturday, knowing that I was going to watch him. I said, you know what, he's kind of their big name guy on offense. Let me just give him a watch. They've got a young guy, Brandon Mack, by the way, who went to the great Cheltenham High School, the #1 high school in America. Just give him a shout out to the Panthers.
#1 in America, yeah.
I mean, some studies have shown that
list there.
Brandon Mack, who's a junior receiver, big, 6'5", 220 plus. He had the game-winning touchdown, has had a great season so far. Brandon Mack, shout out to the Panthers.
No relation to any of the other Macks around football.
Khalil Mack, I don't think so.
Austin Mack at Ohio State.
I don't think he's Austin Mack.
Marlon Mack.
Not Marlon Mack.
Okay.
Mack Wilson from the Cleveland Browns.
Go the other way too,
yeah. But down the road freak show for me, I was going to go with the Florida tight end Pitts, but I would be remiss if I didn't bring up LSU. They've got this corner, Derek Stingley, who's a freshman and has been starting, and they always have a freshman corner. You know this watching them. I mean, they always have a freshman corner. You're like, who's that guy? He's 6'2", he runs a 4.3, and then we don't hear from him again for a year. He told Dave Aranda, the defense coordinator there for LSU, told the broadcast crew that he was their best defensive player. And he's a true freshman.
Wow.
That's Grant Delpit, who some people think is a top 10 pick in this draft. That's Chason, the pass rusher. That's Rashard Lawrence. That's Patrick Queen. All those guys. the freshman corner was the guy he's saying was the best
player. That's almost dangerous
to
do as a coach. You're setting very, very dangerous expectations for the kid. And it was almost like you have to kind of knock him a little bit in public circles.
Right.
To make sure, hey, listen, we have some seniors out there who have deserved it. Hey, he's a good kid. He's got some things to work on.
Right.
Has shown a lot of promise and kind of build him up. But don't put him right on top of the mountain.
Best player on the defense, he said.
That's high praise,
yes.
and he may be right.
Right.
And Stingley has looked like the number one corner in America right now.
Yeah.
But it's early still. He's a true freshman.
Yep.
Cornerback is a learn-on-the-job type of position,
yes,
and there's some gazelles out there that he's going to have to defend, particularly down in Tuscaloosa in a couple weeks, so it'll be interesting to see that.
And remember, they've got Christian Fulton on the other side, so they've got talent in that secondary. But this kid, it seems like the real deal. I haven't studied him on film or anything. I'm not going to for at least another year.
LSU's right up there, in my opinion. I put it out on Twitter last week. LSU, Ohio State, two very impressive defensive back groups. With honorable mention to Oregon and Cal out there as well with some really good players.
All right, well, let's get to where you're heading this week.
Yeah, we got a good matchup in the SEC. Florida at South Carolina, my first trip to Columbia, so excited for that one.
There's a lot of juice here because we got the big upset with South Carolina.
Florida with the first loss coming off of LSU. South Carolina with the big upset against Georgia, probably one of the signature wins of the Muschamp era.
No question.
Which, boy, did this guy need a big signature win because any big game, his team just was not showing up. They started the season kind of on a flat note against North Carolina, a game they should really win. I think they struggled the next week as well. I'm not sure against who. I'm blanking right now. But the way Muschamp looked after that Georgia game, big monkey off his back and just knocking off a top 5 team and showing that South Carolina's got some dudes on it and they can compete with almost anybody.
Well, let's talk about some of those dudes because they do, especially in the senior class. They've got a couple guys that I'm a big fan of on film.
Yeah, they had 2 guys particularly that probably could have come out last year.
Could have.
And that's defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw, senior, 6'5", 308. He's down some weight, and it looks it on tape. He's looking like much more lighter on his feet, much more explosive. Just the effort in the plays down the field, outside the numbers. You're just seeing him a little bit lighter on his feet. And actually, I'd watched him against Georgia last year. I'd studied that tape, and it's a really good tape to watch. Very good offensive line, NFL-caliber offensive line. He's going to play some nose tackle, some one tech. He'll move over to 3 tech and sub. He gets a lot of pressures, not a lot of sacks. So he's making the impact. He's one of those guys you really have to watch the tape and watch him because he's beating people. He's impacting the game. He's disrupting the pocket. He's collapsing the pocket. He's getting in the quarterback's face. He just may be a step slow or the ball may come out.
Right.
But he's doing the right things and showing that his moves and his get off and his impact are having an effect on the game. And those plays will come. As long as your technique's right, your hand usage is right, the pass rush plan is right, the plays will get made. I just think he's on the right trajectory.
What he does translates to the NFL.
No question. My cons on him right now, he's just been a little raw. He's a guy that kind of showed up being a JUCO transfer. He was big, he was strong. Just need to work on the details in his game. The hand usage, the pad level, things like that, his pass rush plan, counter moves, things like that. Can he be a Chris Jones style of player and really turn it on late in his college career into the NFL? Possibly. He looks like Chris Jones. He's tall, he's long, he's a trench player. So that would be kind of the trajectory I would hope he's going to continue on.
Interesting. Well, let's go to the, I would assume the other side of the ball is where your other South Carolina senior resides, Brian Edwards, the senior
and this
receiver.
is funny because I did this game last year as well. South Carolina, Florida. Debo Samuel ran all over this Florida defense, and then eventually they got after Jake Bentley with Ja'Kai Polite. But Brian Edwards first stood out watching Tease Tabor in 2016. And I just saw this young freshman receiver for South Carolina carving up these Florida corners with the releases.
As a big body, too.
No question. I'm like, who is this kid? Snapping in and out of breaks, really shaking these senior or upperclassmen corners that were NFL prospects. So I noted his name down for later. And technician, possession wide receiver, in my opinion. He's a really good route runner. He's got the length, the size, good releases, a variety of releases, too, to set up corners and get them on their heels. Makes good catches. Can make some tough catches and will take some huge hits after the catch and stay on his feet and keep going. Now, the cons on that is he makes some really acrobatic catches, some tight area catches, and then he just drops some easy ones.
He does,
Where he'll have a great release, set up a corner, run a nice route, get in and out of the break on a slant, be wide open by 3 yards, and then drop the slant.
Yep.
And, I just hope that that's not a recurring issue and that his hands aren't as inconsistent as he's shown on tape. I kind of question his long speed, especially on the perimeter.
Sure.
Can he climb on faster corners outside the numbers? I'm not really sure. And he jump catches just a little bit too often, which I think is a...
what is that? Explain that to the listeners.
So jump catching is when you don't need to leave your feet to catch a ball, but you do anyways. And I think that's a bad habit that a lot of receivers have, and it kind of toys with their ability to track the ball, their hand-eye coordination, and it's a little bit of a flash of lack of trust in your hands.
Yep.
In that you're leaving your feet and almost trying to corral the ball with your body and your arms rather than catching it with your hands.
Also takes away from yards after catch
no
as well.
question. Something that can be coached and corrected, certainly. So I like doing this with certain players. I like having tiers of comps.
Yep. Okay.
Because I've seen different flashes of Bryan Edwards. I don't really know what Bryan Edwards is in the metrics and testing and stuff.
Let's hear this, yeah.
So he's just a shade under 6'3",
Okay.
218.
All right.
So let's call him 6'3", 218 right there.
Very Alshon body. Alshon
so that's
body.
Kenny Britt.
Yep.
That's Brian Quick.
Yep.
That's Allen Robinson.
Okay. Allen Robinson bigger than he's always bigger than I remember.
But Kenny Britt's the 4'4" player.
Right.
Brian Quick was the 4'5" player.
Right.
And Allen Robinson's the 4'6" player.
But he doesn't play 4'6".
I think he is that 4'6" player, and I think he is that Allen Robinson type of player that, I don't win with pure speed, but I win with setting cornerbacks up, my route running plan, in and out of breaks, being deliberate, messing with different stride lengths and speeds within the route. That's why I write down he's a technician. And I don't mean it as a negative, calling him a possession wide receiver.
Yeah.
It's just somebody that wins with more deliberate movement patterns, more of a third down player, a guy that's going to move the sticks, not necessarily an over-the-top guy. But I think those three are kind of the mold that we're looking at here. Kenny Britt, Brian Quick, Allen Robinson. Okay. I know Kenny Britt's a little bit more explosive and can win down the field.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking he's a little bit more in the Allen Robinson mold.
Did you have any comps for Kinlaw?
For Kinlaw, I just have Chris Jones written.
That was the one we wrote down. Okay, we talked about that.
That's a huge high upside trajectory type of comp at this point.
All right. Is there anybody else South Carolina you feel like we definitely want to cover?
No, not particularly. I know they have some young receivers, Shai Smith, Ortre Smith. They have an edge rusher, Wonham, I think his name is. DJ
Wonham, and Keir Thomas as well, Keir Thomas.
They have a linebacker, Brunson. There's some cornerback as well that's been playing really well. I think the Draft Network gave him some love this past week. I'm not blanking on his name.
So he had 3 picks against Georgia.
That's right, yeah.
And he's the corner. I actually noticed him last year in this game, in the Florida game. He's like 6'4". 6'3".
Really? Interesting.
Like tall, long, like all arms and legs.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
who's the first tall corner that comes off your top of your head when you're like, I need a 6'3" corner, like
Byron Maxwell,
right? Kevin King.
Kevin King's a good one. Yeah,
Stanley Jean Baptiste, the tall corner.
That's a good one. Yeah. That's a good one. He's still like in the league somewhere.
I think so. Yeah. I think Stanford Route was like 6'3", 6'4".
Nice name.
Ron Bartel.
Then also Deuce Staley's son, Damani Staley is a linebacker there, playing next to Brunson. I believe he is a starter this year.
Oh, interesting.
Those are the only South Carolina guys that pop off.
I think Daniel Fennell is still there. And I wanted to get a picture with him last year with the Fennell jersey. With the jersey. I'm getting it tomorrow or this weekend.
I think after the game, you should leave the truck early, get out, and just do it like a jersey swap. Like whatever hoodie you're wearing for the game.
Last year in pregame warmups, they like to bring their shoulder pads out and not wear them.
Yeah, they don't wear the jerseys. Yeah, right.
I'm telling you, I'm going to throw them on if I see them on the sideline there. All right.
Just send me a picture before you get taken out of the stadium.
Yeah,
right?
There'll be a before and after, and then some sort of bail hearing.
All right. Well, let's talk about the Gators because we talked a little bit about them from that LSU matchup, but who are some guys that you're excited to see here this weekend?
I just want to see this whole receiving core.
Yeah.
Trevon Grimes and Van Jefferson, Tyree Cleveland. I want to see Kyle Pitts, the big, exciting tight end. That they seem like they've been working into the offense a little bit more. At 8 catches against Auburn, 5 catches for 100 yards against LSU.
Every time I turned around, it seemed like he was catching a pass.
From Pennsylvania, too.
From Abington. Shout out.
Montgomery and he's from this really interesting tight end group with Brevin Jordan from Miami, Luke Rucker at Ohio State, the kid that went to Georgia and then tried to go to Illinois but was denied. Whatever
Luke
his
Ford?
name is. Yeah, Luke Ford. Is that what it is? Yeah, Luke Ford.
Luke Ford.
I just did that game, too.
Come on.
But anyway, so all those players on the offensive side of the ball, LaMichael Pirine, the whole deal. I want to see how Kyle Trask can rebound from a kind of an up and down game.
Can I tell you, though, I was impressed with Trask.
I was too.
Yeah,
I thought he looked pretty poised for a guy
in
whatever start he's in, his 3rd, 4th start on the road, LSU.
I know this is a big topic down there. I think they're a better team with Trask than they are with Felipe Franks.
I think so too.
Yeah, I think they're in better hands.
They need stability at the quarterback position. After what they've gone through, they had a really good team last year.
Yep.
And people forget, I think they started with Del Rio. And then started with Felipe Franks. And then went to Trask. And then back to Felipe Franks.
Or was that the year before they started with Del Rio?
But they just had this revolving door at quarterback. And then Emory Jones was a young, exciting freshman that was supposed to be the next guy.
They did work him in a little bit this past week.
But there's just I want consistency. I want a guy to emerge from the group, and Felipe kind of did last year.
Right.
And said, this is my team, let's go.
Yep.
Now, is his play really always living up to that? No. I think they're kind of a defensive team, and they run the ball really well, and I like the way P. Ryan's kind of taken over for Jordan Scarlett in the backfield.
I like P. Ryan. I think P. Ryan will fit in as a nice, number 2, number 3 back in the NFL.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
But it's the defensive side of the ball with a lot of dudes on it, and that's C.J. Henderson out there in the secondary.
Excited to see him?
Yeah, very much so. Kind of a tall, upright corner from Miami, boundary corner out there. Was actually high school teammates with a Miami corner, Trajan Bandy.
Okay.
But the big knock on him right now is, will he tackle, and if he's physical or not.
Right.
And sometimes he is, and sometimes he isn't. I could show you for every play it looks like he whiffs a tackle. I'll show you one where he thumps somebody.
Right.
And he comes in full force on those cat blitzes from the boundary.
And the plays he makes in pursuit, the blitzing off the corner,
question.
like you said. I mean,
I have a category right here: effort plays.
Yeah.
Running down Debo Samuel, 89 yards. Forced fumble versus Tennessee, ran down 50 yards.
Yep.
So don't tell me this guy doesn't play with effort and intensity and passion.
Absolutely.
But yeah, occasionally did he not stick his nose in late against the 230-pound running back? Yeah, probably. But I'll find you that play for every corner in America.
And I think if you look at it like a sliding scale, like with C.J. Henderson with his tools, if you're going to say okay, he's going to miss a couple tackles, but he's 6'1" and runs 4.3 and will get in and out of breaks as easy as anything, I think you kind of...
There's some give and take there.
There's a lot of give and take
and
there.
I think we both hit home runs with this comp when we were watching him in the summer, and we both kind of looked at each other and said, Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie.
Yeah.
And he just looks like him. He's got that long neck. He's tall. He's upright. He's going to run 4.3.
He's going to run 4.3.
Yeah,
no
sub
doubt.
4.4. He's a fast player. He's got the ball skills. He can play all over the defensive backfield, whether you're in nickel, whether you're on the outside, field corner, you want to put him at safety or free safety. He's done that as well. And then what's the knock with Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie? He occasionally doesn't come up and tackle.
Right.
But he's got speed, ball skills, coverage ability. Now, don't judge the Dominique Rodgers-Cromartie the last 2 and 3 years.
Exactly. Or just
but he came into
career,
this league as a stud corner out of Middle Tennessee State and was a high draft pick, was a fast player, and a dominant cover corner for a number of years.
Yep. No, he's Henderson to me. If you're talking pure upside, what they could be, I would argue that there aren't a lot of players in this class, regardless of position, any position, that are as high as C.J. Henderson.
Yep, no question. And I have 3 sacks here, 2 forced fumbles, zone or man, cover 2 or press man. He played free safety. He played nickel. He's got good effort. He just seems to be checking all the boxes that you want from a cornerback. Oh, yeah, he showed up on the freak list, too. You want to see some impressive workout numbers off the field? 40.5-inch vertical, 10.4 broad. He's squatting 550. Got 4.3% body fat. I don't even know if that's possible. Impressive kid. 16 reps at 225. If he shows me 15 reps at 225 at the combine, put this kid in the top half of the first round.
Yeah, no question. Any word on that front? We talked about Grenard left the game early. First of all, that's one of your homework assignments. Is it Jonathan Greenard or is it Grenard? What's the deal with
whatever
the last name?
it is? Just say it with some confidence and some attitude.
Couldn't find the pronunciation.
I'll find
guide
out this
anywhere.
week. Yeah.
So would love to hear what the deal is with him. And then Zuniga. Hopefully he's more.
Yeah, I know
of the way
Zuniga's
back.
been dinged up the past couple of weeks. He was a player I thought, when we've talked about last year quite a bit, this Florida team, we did 4 Florida games last year, so now we're back on the Dan Mullen wagon here. So we had a lot of talk about Ja'Kai Polite versus Jabari Zuniga.
Yep.
And a lot of times I brought up, it reminds me of Tim Williams versus Ryan Anderson.
Right.
Tim Williams was a flashy pass rusher with a good first step. But Ryan Anderson's the better football player.
Yep.
And that's Zuniga. He's the better football player. He'll slide in at 3-tech. He'll play outside in base packages. He's a better run defender. The issue was, does he have the ability to turn the corner?
Right.
And I didn't think he did. And this year, especially that Miami game, I know he's playing against a young left tackle out there in Miami. He was bending that corner and flattening and getting around that edge. I did not think. I had him more in those squatty, thicker edges, like a Carl Lawson.
Right.
Who's 6'2", 261, same type of body type, and I think he could be that type of pass rusher in the NFL as well. I'm interested to see him, and I hope he gets healthy.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, excited to break it down with you next week. It's going to be a lot of fun. One of the bigger games of the week as well. Real quickly before I let you go, I got one matchup for you. In the SEC, this game is going to be a laugher, but Alabama, Tennessee.
Okay.
A guy we've talked about a lot, Darrell Taylor, 2 sacks last week against Mississippi State with their road win, okay? Going up against these Alabama tackles, Jedrick Willis and Alex Leatherwood. That'll be a tape, I think, that a lot of people are going to be tuning in on for Darrell Taylor this offseason.
Yeah, Tennessee needs somebody to step up on the defensive side of the ball and be a constant force and just somebody to show some leadership.
Yep.
And the most frustrating thing I see from Tennessee week in and week out is not necessarily the quality of play, it's the dysfunction.
Yeah.
Not getting lined up, too many men on the field, calling late timeouts, late getting calls into the field. You could see the middle linebacker at times going like this, like to get the call in.
Yep.
Simplify this thing. They have studs on the field. They have playmakers. They have athletes. Simplify the scheme, get them lined up, and let them play.
Yeah, it's been tough sledding from them this year. It's not going to get easier.
No,
their schedule,
and they're going through
Alabama,
some things on offense, trying to figure out the quarterback position, but watch that team because there's players at every position.
Yep.
And it may be like the way University of Texas was when they really weren't a competitive program for the past, before 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah, sure.
Because they have some NFL players.
Yep.
Whether it's Trey Smith, whether it's those guys in the backfield, Ty Chandler, whether it's Jawan Jennings, Marquez Callaway. There's some players all over that offense. That tight end, Dominic Wood-Anderson's a really interesting number 1 JUCO tight end. So even though they're not putting up points and winning games, doesn't mean they don't have players to watch for the next level. So for a draft perspective, definitely watch that game.
Yeah, no question. Well, Ben, we'll be talking with you next week about this Florida-South Carolina game. Thanks for joining us once again here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Well, great stuff as always from Ben, and as always, like I say each week, Ben does a great job with us here with the Eagles, helping out with Eagle Eye in the Sky, with the Eagles game plan. By the way, if you're an Eagles fan, listen to the show. I know not everybody listens as an Eagles fan, but if you're an Eagles fan, you want to learn a little bit more about this big matchup with the Eagles and Cowboys. Ben and I worked all week on Eagles game plan, getting you ready for the Sunday Night Football matchup on both sides of the ball. A lot to break down from this game, so make sure you tune into that on PhiladelphiaEagles.com, the Eagles YouTube page, the Eagles app, wherever all of our X's and O's content can be found. All right, one person that is always on Eagles game plan is Greg Cosell, and he joined us this week here for Mr. Relevant on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, joining us this week here on Mr. Relevant on the Journey to the Draft podcast, none other than the man himself,
Mr.
Greg Cosell.
Irrelevant?
Mr. Relevant.
Oh.
Not irrelevant.
Oh, I thought you said Mr. Irrelevant.
No,
I was like getting ready to,
I try and make it positive.
Oh,
Mr.
man.
Relevant.
God.
I thought it was creative when I came up with it a few years ago.
It's pretty creative, but I got a little nervous there for a second, Fran.
Oh, yeah, we try and give you a little bit of props.
All right.
So we're joined by Greg Cosell. And Greg, we're going to talk. Let's couch the conversation right at the jump. You aren't studying these guys based off what they've done so far in the 2019 season. You are watching some college games here and there on TV on Saturdays.
Not tape yet.
As a fan.
Right.
You're not watching tape yet. But you have done thorough studies of all these guys based off of 2018.
Correct.
Some even going back the year before.
Correct.
So, we'll get your thoughts on where they were coming into the year, and then we'll get your thoughts again as we get into the postseason. But I want to talk about some big name players,
right? Because
everybody waits for your opinion on all these players. Once you get to February, you're done with the NFL season, and you start talking about these college
I appreciate
kids.
that, Fran.
Well, everyone waits for their opinion. So I thought, let's get ahead of the curve a little bit and get some of your early notes, your early thoughts on some of these big names. And obviously, you're very well respected for your thoughts on the quarterback position. So let's start with quarterback Justin Herbert from Oregon. Most would say coming in was the number 1 prospect, if not the number 2 prospect, with another player we'll talk about here in a second. But let's talk with Justin Herbert and get your thoughts overall on where you kind of view him in his transition to the NFL.
Well, let me just start by saying that Herbert's a guy that I actually watched and I'm looking at my notes because I watched this in June.
Can you hold it up to the camera? If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see the video. Here are Greg Cosell's notes. If you're listening, you could just hear the rustling of the paper. He's got his notes printed out.
These are my notes. So there's strengths, weaknesses, transition, and other. Okay. That's the way I do it.
Got it.
All right? And this is kind of a stream of consciousness as I watch.
Yeah.
And sometimes as I watch, something I might see in game 1 or 2, I get to game 5 or 6 in a given year, and it looks a little different.
Sure.
So I change it.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of, a computer. You can make those changes.
Correct.
So just so people understand, with Herbert, I watched 8 games in 2017 because I thought he was going to come out.
A lot of people did.
And then in 2018, I watched 4, and all of his 20-plus yard completions because I felt like
you already watched him. And
I felt like I had a pretty good feel for the player. Now, the reality with Herbert, and again, I don't get to interview players.
Yes.
You know that. Okay, you don't either. I mean, at the combine,
we
you
talked
might have
a little
quick
bit,
chat,
yes,
but it's not a hardcore interview like a team does. So, Herbert is one of those guys. He's got, I would say, he's the prototype for today's NFL game.
Yep.
Okay, he's big and athletic.
Yeah.
He's got the ability to drive the ball from the pocket and make second reaction plays outside of structure. He's a flash thrower with the high-level arm talent to make special throws.
Yep.
At times, he can be a little consistent and erratic with his ball placement, and that's always a little bit of a concern. But the size, the movement, the ability to drive the football, even to take a little bit off the ball and throw with some touch, I think he's got all the physical traits you look for. Now, that in and of itself does not necessarily mean he's a great pro. I've seen a couple of games on television. There's nothing, again, it's not tape study, but there's nothing to dissuade me from that point of view at this point.
Is there a particular scheme or an offense, a style of play that you feel like best suits him in transitioning to the NFL? And obviously, look, schemes are so intertwined now, so it's not like, pure West Coast offense.
Right.
Is there a kind of style of play that you feel like would best suit him?
I think he can fit most, but I would say that in an ideal world, I could see him being really effective as a quarterback that does some work under center with the play-action pass game.
Yep.
Where he can drop back with deeper drops, hit, let's say the crossers in a post cross, or hit the intermediate type routes, whether it's a post cross, whether it's flood concepts, those deeper developing route concepts.
Yep.
Now, I think I wouldn't call him twitchy in the sense that, let's say, Tua is twitchy, but I think he can also work from the gun and deliver shorter throws as well. But I wouldn't see that as the ultimate strength of his game.
Yeah.
Do you see the same?
No, that's kind of how I view him too.
Yeah.
I would say, if you put him into a style of offense, we see it so often around the NFL now. Like, to me, like if you're talking about the teams that are at the top, that are probably going to be picking at the top of this draft, if coaching staff say the same, and all that,
right.
Cincinnati with Zach Taylor and where he comes from.
I think he would be perfect.
That's it,
because
right?
he was with McVay.
Yep.
And you could make the argument, I think fairly easily, that he's a more talented player than Jared Goff.
Yeah.
Just in terms of physical traits.
Sure. I mean, to me, I look at it and say,
Right.
all right, like, play.
And by the way, they'll be looking for a quarterback.
Get him out on the perimeter.
And he can do that with
yeah.
no problem. And he has enough athleticism to be able to make plays with his legs, both throwing it and then running for first downs.
Sure.
So he's a pretty high-level talented guy. It's just the consistency with his ball placement can be at times, a little bit off.
Yep.
And then you have to find out how that translates when he's in an NFL where there'll be more pressure throws.
So let's get now to Otago Viola from Alabama, and a player that, look, he continues to put up ridiculous numbers. And the receiving core that he's dealing with, we'll talk about that
It's pretty good.
Is very, very good.
Yeah.
But a talented player, a
Without
guy
question.
that a quick release and has a lot of the tools you look for.
Yeah.
Tell us how you see his transition.
I mean, just again, watching him on TV before we get to my notes is they run a ton of RPOs.
Yep.
And that's big in the NFL. I don't think you'll run as many in the league as you run in college.
Right.
But they run the RPO game exceedingly well. And obviously you get a ton of slants off of that. And with those receivers, you get a lot of, 8-yard throws that become 60-yard touchdowns.
Sure.
Which obviously makes his numbers look sensational. Here's what I thought after 2018.
Okay.
And I watched 5 games plus all of Jerry Jeudy's pass targets and all of Henry Ruggs' pass targets.
All right, so we got a lot of
that's a lot
here.
of throws.
Yeah, we got a lot of throws here.
A lot of throws. And I said in my transition that he presents as a good athlete who's an efficient executor of a well-schemed passing game with good timing and plus ball placement with the ability to make second reaction outside of structure plays. He was a programmed passer in an Alabama offense that did an excellent job defining the reads and the throws.
Yep.
And I think they do that this year as well. Now, does he have movement ability? Yes, he does. But I think at his core, he's really kind of a precision pocket player.
Right.
He'll move around, and he can do that.
Sure.
But I think at his core, that's what he is.
Yeah.
And I'm curious to see how he transitions. And I know there's a lot of talk. He's the number 1 pick in the draft. He's the definite number 1 pick. Maybe he will be.
He might be, right.
None of us can answer that. And I think he'll be a good player. Without studying his 2019 tape, I didn't come away from his 2018 tape feeling like this guy is a can't-miss number 1 superstar Hall of Fame kind of prospect.
I thought that there were times late.
And you and I have discussed this, by the way.
Particularly late in the year, and this was when he was banged up,
And he was banged up.
He was banged up. He had, what was it, the knee, right? He had some lower body stuff. That pressure, I think, affected him a little bit more negatively than you would think. Let me ask you this question, though. He operates very, very well outside of structure. You detailed that.
He does.
How do you feel about him operating outside of structure?
Pros and cons.
Okay.
And I think I even made that. What did I say here? Let's see.
I think, and this will be a discussion on a podcast, maybe for the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast for in the offseason, is what young quarterbacks need to have success early in their career in the NFL. And I think that the more you watch, athleticism is just becoming more and more important.
More and more important,
especially because of the de-evolution of offensive line play around the league.
No, and I think that's an important point. And I think that's one reason why a lot of so-called pocket quarterbacks, someone like a Nate Stanley from Iowa is going to drop. Because I think unless you're absolutely special in that area, I mean, like really special, the sense is that unless you can make plays outside of structure because of the advantage that the defense has athletically and with all these pressure concepts that are difficult to deal with for offenses, if you cannot make plays outside the structure of the offense, that it can be difficult. Now, there's a balance there because you still have to be able to make throws from the pocket at some point.
Of course.
But maybe it's not, maybe when you go back to, let's say, 2003 when Carson Palmer came out and he'd be viewed as a special thrower, but, I think that guy is not automatically seen as the can't miss as he was back then.
Yep.
And you're right. So I think Tua can do that. I think at times he can get a little reckless when he's like that.
Yeah.
I think at times his accuracy wanes when he does that. But there's no question he can do it.
So same question from Herbert. Is there a scheme that you feel best kind of suits what he would be asked to do? I
think he's much more of a rhythm, twitchy player than Herbert.
So like Miami, in terms of the way that they would like to play, theoretically more of a fit for a Tua.
Yes, theoretically.
Interesting. Okay, let's get to the third one. And if you had said this, we'll say 4 months, this is the middle of October. If you had said in the middle of June that Jordan Love belongs in the same tier as these two guys.
And he'll be controversial, Fran, because he's not having a great year numbers-wise.
Yep.
His team played LSU in Death Valley a few weeks ago, and obviously he did not have a good game, and the team was overmatched.
In terms of the numbers that he
right, so right away that means that he can't play. We know how that goes.
I haven't watched the film yet from this year.
No, neither have I.
I watched one game on TV. It was in the rain, Colorado State, the 2 weekends ago. He faced some adversity. The weather, I think, definitely affected him, and he threw a couple picks. He had a fumble in the game. I don't care.
Right.
His film in 2018 was outstanding.
I agree. And I mean, here's the note I made. I said, based on his 2018 tape, Love is a high-level prospect with the overall skill set to be in discussion for a top 5 or top 10 pick in the draft.
I agree.
Now, whether that plays out, none of us can say. I said arm strength, pace and touch, precise ball placement, athleticism, movement. He's a natural thrower with a smooth and easy delivery. And there's one thing about the way he throws that you don't see very often. He's an over-the-top thrower.
Yeah.
And you don't see that very often with quarterbacks coming out. So I really liked his 2018 tape. When I put his tape on, somebody told me about him. I knew nothing about him. So I was watching him. He was a virgin to me. I knew nothing about him. Oh, you told me.
That's right.
There you go.
I told you because I had just watched him against Michigan State, the Michigan State film, and I said, Greg, I think I called you. And I said, Greg,
you did. And then I watched him. It was the summer. Yeah. And I watched him. And I really like his skill set. I need to see his 2019 tape. I know he's thrown probably a few more interceptions, but I've always believed that interceptions are individual things that have to be seen as individual plays, not just a number on a sheet of paper.
Sure. I think there was when Josh Allen, what was it, 7 picks he threw against Nebraska. It was like, oh, well, he threw 7 picks against Nebraska. This guy's never going to be any good.
Right.
And you go back and watch it, and it's like, well, 2 of them bounced off receivers' hands.
Right.
One.
No, I've always believed that about interceptions. You can't just look at a number on a sheet of paper.
Yeah. All right. So same question now for the last quarterback we're going to talk about. Is there a scheme? Because I'm going to say one thing, Greg, and I hate to do this. I hate it. He reminds me of Mahomes the way he plays because he's so big and he's so natural, and the touch, the accuracy on the move from all platforms.
And by the way, first of all, just as a quick aside, Mahomes has struggled a bit the last 3 weeks because the looseness and undisciplined nature of his play, which by the way bothered a lot of people when he came out, which is why he was not given his arm talent, not considered a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pick in the draft.
Yep.
And I had a number of conversations at the Combine with coaches who struggled with him for that reason. So, by the way, saying that to me is not, oh my God, you're comparing him to a Hall of Famer.
Of course.
Right.
But in terms of what I think a lot of people would say, he's the MVP of the league. He's the best quarterback in the NFL.
Right. And he made...
Right or wrong. That's what people will say. Yes.
And I could see your point. I mean, he's big. He's athletic. He's an easy thrower of the foot. Maybe not quite as easy as Mahomes, who is freakish. But yes, there's an element of that to his game.
Yeah. Love Jordan Love. Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see where those 3 get stacked as we get closer to April. All right, let's get now to 3 of the, and this is going to be, it's depending on the underclassmen that come out, a very, very strong class of wide receivers. So I want to kind of hit you up on 3 of the biggest names.
All right.
And let's start with the guy who won the Fred Biletnikoff Award last year as the top receiver in college football. He did it as a true sophomore at the University of Alabama. You just said you watched all of his targets from last year.
I did.
That is one Jerry Jeudy.
I think he's just silly good.
He's really good.
I mean, I could read my notes, but I think the guy's silly good.
So we talk about body control for a receiver in terms of his ability to go up and win and catch point and their ball skills. His body control as a route runner and with his releases off the line are silly.
I don't know. He kind of reminded me of Odell Beckham.
I think that's the easy comparison. Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
no question.
And again, I watched him this summer. I ended by saying he's a high-level receiving prospect who could easily be talked about as a top 10 pick in the 2020 draft, and that was watching him in June.
Yep.
And there's nothing about this year that changes my point of view. Yep. And his run after catch, I mean, he is so dynamic, run after catch. Just his stop-start, his fluidity. I mean, there's a quickness. There's just a natural juice to his movement that you don't see very often.
Inside-outside versatility. I mean,
without
you're going to put him in. You're going to put him inside. You're going to put him outside.
Yeah.
He's going to be able to win. He's going to be able to separate. He's good at the catch point, yards after catch.
I mean, to me, barring anything with his personal stuff, and I don't know that, but assuming there's no issues there, I could easily see him as a top 5 pick.
Yeah. The only thing you're missing with Jerry Jeudy is he's not Julio Jones size. Like he's not a big kid.
No, he's tall.
You don't necessarily need that.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
That would be the knock. All right. I think that's an easy transition. We don't have to even talk about where does he fit best. Let's talk about a different guy though. In Laviska Shenault from Colorado, who has a different offense this year. We have Mel Tucker coming in as the head coach.
Right.
So the
numbers haven't been as good.
Numbers haven't been as good. I know he's been hampered a little bit by injury earlier this year. The scheme, like we said, has changed. But take us through what you saw from Laviska last year.
I liked him a lot.
Yeah.
And again, the numbers were better last year. He was a big athletic receiver. He lined up all over their formation last year.
Not even like, he played inside and outside. Backfield, tight end, like wing, everywhere. It would be 3rd and long, and he'd be pass protecting. He'd be holding state in pass protection.
This may be crazy. And again, I'm just sitting there watching tape and thinking about, what his future could be.
Sure.
It doesn't mean it is. I said, are there elements of Deandre Hopkins in Chenault's game?
Yep.
Okay. I said also saw some Sammy Watkins and a young Terrell Owens.
That's so funny that you said Sammy Watkins.
I mean, that's the size, the physicality, the run after catch.
Yep.
Because look, in the NFL, I understand that guys line up in different spots, but for the most part, receivers are not going to line up in the backfield.
Right.
And, he's going to be a receiver.
So I wrote down Sammy Watkins in a Julio Jones wrapper.
Interesting.
Like
I can see that.
I mean, he's built. He's so physical,
yes.
like physically imposing.
Physically imposing.
And I went in kind of thinking, this guy's going to be a really raw route runner, and he's used in all these different ways. You go back to how Sammy Watkins was at Clemson, and you saw the yards after catch and how physical he was with the ball in his hands, and he had that edge to him, but wasn't really a polished route runner, and he's not. But he does show flashes.
Yes, and I thought he showed separation with the ball in the air.
Yes.
And that, to me, was critical because he's such a big body, but he was able to separate from college corners with the ball in the air. And that's what you really look for. It's not about being a 4.34 guy. There's a lot of guys who can run fast in a straight line, but they don't necessarily separate from corners.
Yep.
And he had that separation with the ball in the air ability to him, and I thought that was really important.
So you mentioned DeAndre Hopkins earlier. The guy that actually kind of reminded me a little bit of DeAndre Hopkins, and from not a total package, but some aspects of his game, was CeeDee Lamb. And that's the last guy I want to ask you about.
Not as big as Hopkins.
The height, that is the big thing. And the thing is that he's a little bit huskier because I think Lamb is like around 190, and I think Hopkins is a little bit bigger.
Hopkins, I believe, is 210,
but he's so crazy good at the catch point.
Yeah, and I made the point he's a long, smooth, competitive wide receiver with deceptive vertical ability due to his size and stride length. I think he can line up both inside and outside. But yeah, I really liked him a lot. Now, there's a receiver we're not talking about, who I know a lot of people love, and I like CeeDee Lamb more, for instance, than T. Higgins from Clemson. Okay. Now, that'll be a big debate, because Higgins is...
There's a ton of receivers in this class. There's going to be a lot of debate about it.
But I really like CeeDee Lamb. Yeah. He was just so smooth. He was competitive. You made that point.
Yes.
Very competitive guy.
The thing that stands out to me about him, the play that I'll always kind of think of, is the playoff game against Alabama last year, where Bama was they were blowing them out. Right. Kyler Murray didn't have a great start to the game. They got into an early hole. CeeDee Lamb kind of gave Oklahoma a spark with a huge crack block and just laid out this Alabama defender. They're losing by 3 scores, and you kind of see that edge.
I like him a lot. I mean, he'll be a first-round pick, barring anything unforeseen. It's just a question of where. And then you have to decide how you want to use him, because like I said, I think you can line him up inside or outside.
Inside or outside. So with all 3 guys, you're not worried in terms of usage.
Judy's the best prospect. Yeah. Whether he becomes the best NFL player, we never know those answers, but I think he's the best prospect.
Is there any usage you're worried about with Shenault in terms of how he can line up in the NFL?
No, not to me.
Okay. It's a good group of receivers. It's a good group of quarterbacks. It's going to be a fun group to break down overall going into this draft. We had that last year. Not a lot of sexy skill talent, I think, overall, like big picture. This year, it's going to be the opposite.
I tell you, the guy I'm fascinated to break down once the season ends, because I didn't do him last summer, was Joe Burrow.
I'll tell you what. I've watched a couple games on film.
Yeah.
He's playing at a very high level.
I've just seen some games on I watched the full game the other night.
Yeah.
Against Florida. Yep.
He's playing
really well.
He's playing really well. A little different than some of these guys we're talking about.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that in months to come for sure. Well, Greg, appreciate the time as always. We will talk to you soon.
All right, Fran.
Well, Greg is just a wealth of knowledge, as you guys all know. And as I mentioned earlier, he joins us every week over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. Greg and I talk X's and O's. It's not just always about the Eagles and the upcoming matchup. We talk some big picture things as well. Make sure you check that out always, wherever podcasts can be found. The Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. All right, let's head now to our next segment. Let's get some word on the street. Let's go to Draft Buzz with Tony Pauline.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Back again for another edition of Draft Buzz, the draft analyst extraordinaire from the Pro Football Network, Tony Pauline. You can follow him on Twitter at Tony Pauline. Tony, welcome back. Let's get the word on the street, man. What's the latest through the grapevine when it comes to all things NFL draft?
I've spoken with a number of people, and they tell me that they think at the end of the year, Anthony Mcfarland Jr., the explosive and creative ball carrier from the Maryland Terrapins, is very likely to enter the draft. They say there's really no reason why they think he's going to stay, although they do have a new coach there, and he may try and re-recruit him. McFarland's having a terrific season. Some people I spoke with actually think he's a faster version of, believe it or not, Alvin Kamara. I don't necessarily agree with that opinion because Kamara's a little bit bigger. I also think that McFarland is probably a more skilled ball carrier at this point in his career than Kamara. But I think that McFarland, you're looking at a guy who's more than likely a situational back at the next level, a guy who's a spot starter, but someone that you can use as a ball carrier out of the backfield as well as a pass catcher because he catches the ball very well.
Interesting. A guy that I've seen up close a couple of times. Obviously, the Maryland Terrapins losing here at Lincoln Financial Field to the Temple Owls earlier this year, but very interesting to see that he will enter this draft. Well, Tony, whose stock is up? Because obviously we're getting to the point now. I mean, it's crazy to think of how far along we are in the college football season. We're talking about Week 8. Whose stock is up now or is continuing to rise?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we're at the halfway point, or we're just over the halfway point. I mean, you got to look at CD Lamb, who had a tremendous game against Texas. He's had a terrific season. 28 receptions this year, but 610 yards, 3 TDs against Texas. You look at that game, and it basically was what he did after the catch, as well as besides catching the ball. He's a consistent and dependable receiver. He does a good job getting separation. He's always in tune with the quarterback, and it's a new quarterback this year in Jalen Hurts. I think, 10 touchdowns over the course of the entire year. I'm not ready to say he's the number one receiver yet in the nation as far as an NFL prospect is concerned, as a lot of people are already pegging him to be. I do think, though, and we spoke about Lamb before the season began, I do think if he enters a draft, which I'm here he's very likely to do, and he runs well, he'll be in the narrative as far as the first round is concerned. I don't think he's the top receiver prospect in the nation, though.
Yeah, we talked about CD earlier in the show with Greg, and a guy that you and I know are both big fans of, what he can do at every level of the defense. Very, very impressive player, a dynamic option at the wide receiver position. All right, let's talk now about a small school player. Who is your small school prospect for us to watch here this week in Draft Buzz?
Last week we talked about the quarterback from Princeton, who no one was talking about. I'm going to go a little bit further south, stay on the East Coast, and I'm going to talk about Ben Dinucci, the quarterback from James Madison, who started his career at Pittsburgh, transferred to James Madison. He was a guy who was ignored by scouts coming into the year. He played really well last year at James Madison, completed 68% of his throws for 2,275 yards. He's even off to a better start this year, completing more than 70% of his passes, 1,500 yards passing in 7 games, 11 touchdowns to just 2 interceptions. When I watched Dinucci off the 2018 film, I couldn't believe that he wasn't graded by scouts. I mean, you look at him, he's athletic, he has a live arm, he gets it between the ears. He does a great job controlling and commanding and running the offense. For the most part, he stays away from poor passes or poor decisions. He's not the tallest guy in the world, but he's a very productive quarterback. I have a feeling we're going to see him in the postseason, maybe the Shrine Game. I got to say, at least the NFLPA game. I could see him getting a combine invite. I could see him being really on the fence and potentially getting a combine invite, gets in at the last minute. Dinucci's a guy, like I said, was ignored by scouts coming into the year. I absolutely think he's got to be in the conversation for the very late rounds in next April's draft.
Is he above the Princeton quarterback we spoke about last week?
Yeah, he's further ahead in his game. He's further ahead because he's got a bigger body of work. He's more experienced. Obviously, he plays in the CAA, which, while it's not playing against LSU, the CAA conference in 1AA is a pretty good conference, and it's better competition than what Princeton plays against. So yeah, Dinucci's definitely higher rated. I think the Princeton quarterback, based on his size, based on his arm strength, based on his physical skills, has a greater upside. But I think Dinucci is more, if you would say, NFL ready, and he's more the guy that would make an active roster in 2020 when you look at the two.
Yeah, we've seen CAA players go even as high as the third round just in the last couple of years. So certainly a player to keep an eye on. Well, Tony, let's talk about this weekend, some more big matchups, and I want to get one from you, an individual matchup you're excited to watch here this Saturday in college football.
Well, it's got to be Isaiah Hodgins, who we talked about on this podcast a couple times, a receiver from Oregon, who's really turned into a touchdown-making machine this year.
Oregon State.
Sorry, Oregon State. Isaiah Hodgins, Oregon State. We talked about, I believe, last week, past 2 weeks. Touchdown-making machine this year. 9 touchdowns in 6 games. He's got 51 receptions for 709 yards. He just keeps producing. And now this week, he's going to go up against one of the tougher defenses in the Pac-12, the Cal defense. He's got Evan Weaver, the linebacker. I don't know there's going to be too many matches against Evan Weaver, but you got Kam Byram, the underclassman cornerback, who I grade right now as a third rounder. A lot of scouts like him. You got Aston Davis, the safety, who was graded by some scouts as a potential top 45 pick, and then Jalen Hawkins, who's more of a late round guy. All those guys are good football players. They're all heavy hitters. They all have decent ball skills. Davis is an athletic guy who's got great straight line speed, a former hurdle champion. Bynum has got developing ball skills. He was good last year. He's even better this year. I think this is going to be the first. Now, Hodgins did beat up Paulson Adebo of Stanford, who we've talking about, but Adebo's had a terrible year. This may be one of the more complete secondaries that Hodgkins has played to date. So it's going to be one of his toughest matchups of the year. Although I should say he did play Utah. He did a decent job against Utah. And I actually would say that I think the Cal defensive secondary is probably playing better than the Utah's secondary is these days.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I don't know. The front seven for Utah probably gets the edge, but that secondary for Cal is a legit group. You mentioned Paulson Adebo. That just reminded me. Over the weekend, I watched Gabe Davis, the wide receiver from UCF that you had said was going to declare for the draft a couple of months ago here on this podcast. His matchup against Adebo made some big plays down the field. I'll tell you what, you know who Gabe Davis reminds me of, Tony, is Dante Moncrief when he was coming out of Ole Miss. And he's lasted in the NFL now for a few years as a big body deep threat. So Gabe Davis, a guy certainly to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And as we talked about over the summer, he's my number one rated prospect from the American Athletic Conference. I think he's a second round pick. If he runs well, he could go even higher. He's a good deep threat, although he doesn't have great vertical speed, but the balance, the body control he plays with, the way he goes up and fights and comes down for the contested grab, the way he's under control at all times. And you watch that Stanford game, he had a lot of big plays. They really didn't need him in that game because of the fact that UCF, Central Florida, got so far ahead in that game so early. And there hasn't really been too many times this year where they've really needed Gabe Davis, because more times than not, Central Florida has been way ahead early in the game.
Well, you mentioned earlier that Utah defense, and they're going to be my focus. I want to stay out west for my matchup this week, and the one that I'd love to get your comments on, Arizona State. Third running back, Eno Benjamin. We've talked a little bit on this podcast about the wide receiver, Brandon Ayuk. Watch him against that Utah secondary. But I want to focus in. Eno Benjamin, the running back, against Utah, this front seven, namely the senior linebacker, Francis Bernard, a player that I was very high on coming into the year, had never started for the Utes, was a previous starter at BYU before he transferred. This guy's got all the tools to be a three-down backer at the NFL level. The athleticism is there. He's physical. He can come downhill and play. His play recognition skills were a little bit left a little bit to be desired, I thought, off his junior tape. I can't wait to dive in and study this year. But Francis Bernard is a guy I know has been making plays. What do you think about that matchup with Eno Benjamin, Francis Bernard?
Yeah, and we talked a couple of weeks ago about the matchup between Eno Benjamin and Evan Weaver, and Francis Bernard is even a bigger challenge than Eno Benjamin, who's really hasn't put up big numbers this year, right, because he's so athletic, because he has such great range. You talk about the 2018 film on Francis Bernard. Go back and watch that Holiday Bowl where Francis Bernard was covering receivers 30 yards downfield. He's got the speed to cut off the corners from Eno Benjamin. His play recognition, I think, his instincts have gotten better because he's getting more playing time. Remember, he struggled to see the field last year at Utah because they were stacked at linebacker. But I agree with you. Benjamin's a guy who can turn the corner. You want to see if Francis Bernard can get out there and cut off those corners, which I think he can, because he's not just a straight line defender. He's the guy who goes sideline to sideline. He's fast out to the flanks. You want to see how he does against Eno Benjamin in coverage, because Benjamin's a solid pass catcher out of the backfield. I think Francis Bernard's got, 2 touchdowns this year. One was an interception return the first game of the year against BYU for 50-some-odd yards. Right. This is a terrific matchup because it's strength against strength. It's athleticism and speed and quickness against athleticism, speed, and quickness.
Yeah, Eno Benjamin has a lot of Kareem Hunt in his game, from what I remember from him from Toledo. Last question for you, Tony. We're going to wrap things up with our mock draft roundup, and we're going to go to NFLmocks.com. I pulled just a random mock draft. Eagles selecting 23rd overall in that mock draft, and they select Alabama cornerback Trayvon Diggs. A little ironic considering the Eagles just saw his older brother Stephon Diggs this past weekend. So, Tony, Trayvon Diggs, 23 overall. Where do you think of the value there? Is it too rich? Is it a little bit early, a little bit late? What do you think with Trayvon Diggs? Because personally, I love Trayvon Diggs. I think he's a first-round talent for sure.
I think he's a potential top 15 pick if he stays healthy and continues to progress. If you watch that game last week against Texas A&M, Diggs is big. He's over 6'1". He's over 200 pounds. He reportedly runs in the 4.4s. He doesn't look it because he's so tall. He's so large. But the one thing I love about this kid is, number one, there's the bloodlines there because his brothers are good football players. But he's one of those tall, fast defensive backs who actually are very good making plays with their back to the ball. He doesn't do a lot of face guarding. He gets his head back around. He locates the pass. I like his ball skills. I love his upside. The only thing about Diggs was, would he stay healthy because of that foot injury, which kept him on the sidelines last year? Yeah. So far, he's staying healthy. they haven't played a lot of great offenses. The Alabama defense. I think Diggs, when all is said and done, if he passes combine medicals and he works out as expected, I think he's going to be a top 15 pick. I think he's got great upside. I think he's a very good player right now. I think if the Eagles could get him at 23, I think that's the kind of pick where you run to the board with the name on the card.
Yeah, the Eagles obviously very happy with Andre Dillard surprisingly falling to them in the first round this past year. That would be a scenario I think would be very, very similar. Well, Tony, appreciate the time as always here in Draft Buzz. We will talk to you here next week on the Journey to the Draft podcast.
Absolutely. We'll talk to you then.
Get a behind-the-scenes look at life with the Philadelphia Eagles on the Eagles Insider podcast, presented by Lincoln Financial Group. From football to pop culture, no topic is off limits with the Eagles Insider Dave Spadaro. Subscribe today wherever you listen to podcasts. And I say it each week, Dave Spadaro gets great access to some of the top people throughout the organization, on the field, off the field, doesn't matter. I know he's got great interviews lined up for this week's show, for next week's show. They're always working ahead, so a lot of great stuff coming up here on the Eagles Insider podcast. All right, let's get to the next segment of the show. I told you earlier we would break down Florida pass rusher Jabari Zuniga. He's our subject this week in Scouting Report.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the Scouting Report.
All right, so Jabari Sunita, we talked about him a little bit earlier in the show with Ben, and to me, one of the more fun players to watch in this senior class along the defensive line. So I'll just kind of jump through my notes a little bit. He was on the Senior Bowl watch list coming into the season. People thought he could have declared last year. We talked a lot about him on the show last year, as Ben mentioned earlier, with his teammate getting so much of the love in Ja'Kai Polite. Zuniga was a guy that continued to flash. So some people thought that he would declare. He went back and is now building on that resume that he did last year as a junior. He was freshman All-SEC back in 2016. That's actually how he first popped onto my radar with what he did in his first year on campus. He's also been on Bruce Feldman's freak list over the last couple of years because some crazy weight room numbers. He's listed at under 8% body fat. So you're talking about a guy who really takes care of his body, takes the process seriously, has done all those things off the field. 2.5-year starter playing there for Todd Grantham in that multiple front scheme. And he's a very versatile piece. He'll line up everywhere. In their base 3-4, he'll line up as a 3 or a 4 or a 5 technique across from the guard, maybe just slightly inside the offensive tackle. So a trench player, but then he'll line up everywhere from nose tackle, in between the center and the guard, or all the way outside the tackle, outside the tight end as a defensive end. So lines up and down the line of scrimmage. He's 6'4", 255, pretty good length. This guy looks the part. And from a positive standpoint, he's got impressive initial quickness. When he lines up at defensive end in their sub packages, he flies off the ball with good pad level. As a pass rusher, his best move is his quick swim move. He can use that to win early, get into the backfield, and make plays against the run and the pass. But his go-to move, the one that he uses most often, is certainly his bull rush. He'll use some counters off that as well. He does a nice push-pull move and really has a lot of tools in the toolbox. I'd like to see him improve across the board in all of them, but he really does a nice job in terms of the volume of moves that he's got in his repertoire. Really a lot of stuff there for him as a pass rusher. At the point of attack, really, really impressive. He's very violent with his hands, does a nice job setting the edge as a defensive end, and he'll hold his own as a defensive tackle. He'll give up some ground against double teams, but overall really competes well at the point of attack, chases the action from the backside. He's got a good motor. As a pass rusher as well, he's really good on stunts and twists up front, so he brings that value as well. I mentioned that initial quickness, and I would say the biggest negative, the number one thing I've got for Zuniga that I'd like to see just kind of build off of, he can be a little bit slow off the ball in terms of his reaction quickness and timing the snap. He can be the last gator out of his stance, and that negates that initial quickness. So while he gains a lot of ground and you see him fly off the ball, and you're like, whoa, like this guy has that suddenness, you just want to see him time the snap a little bit more consistently. Sometimes he's the first man off the ball. Too often, he's the last guy off the ball. So that was the one thing that really I walked away from watching his film this summer, saying I'd like to see him improve. He does have a little bit of stiffness turning the corner. We talked about that with Ben. This year on film, he's flashed a little bit more flexibility than from what I saw from him as a junior. As I mentioned, I'd like to see him continue improving that pass rush plan. He's got a bunch of moves. Really want to see if he can just kind of make some of them really, really effective. Instead of having a wide variety that are solid, let's see if you can kind of narrow that down and have a couple really good go-to pass rush moves when attacking offensive linemen. Overall, though, this is my final summary on him. Very well-rounded player who excels at the point of attack as a run defender, offers some juice as a versatile inside-out player along the defensive line at the next level. will likely never be viewed as a team's primary pass rusher up front, but I see a guy who's a really nice piece for a one-gap defensive line in the NFL as he continues to get bigger. One name that kind of stands out to me watching Zuniga is Malik Jackson. When he was coming out of Tennessee, he was, again, one of those guys who was a defensive end, defensive tackle hybrid. Jackson was a little bit heavier, so that's why I think he trended more as a defensive tackle, but Zuniga has that inside-out versatility, and I think a lot of teams will look at that as something that's very, very valuable in today's league with all the different sub-package fronts and sliding people inside. I think he'll offer a lot of value in that area. All right, let's wrap this show up. Our final segment, let's go to Draft Mailbag.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the Draft Mailbag.
All right, so we've got one question from the Hopper this week over on Apple Podcast page. And so what that means is that if you want your question answered, all you have to do is go into Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, leave a question, and we will answer it here on the show. You'll be first up because I'm at the bottom of the barrel here, scraping for the podcast questions on those pages. So go wherever you listen, leave us a rating and leave us a comment with your question, and we will answer it here on the show. This week's question from David: what is something that a corner needs to be able to have to fit into this Eagles scheme, and who are the players that fit that in this class? That's a very good question, David. I think when you look at what the Eagles need from the cornerback position, look, they play a variety of coverages, right? You're going to see off coverage, man coverage, zone coverage, press coverage. You're going to see everything that you want from a technique standpoint, a scheme standpoint. It's all there in the Eagles scheme. But the one trait you absolutely need to have in any one-gap defense, your DBs have got to tackle, especially in today's game when you're talking about bubble screens and jet sweeps, all those different things. Teams on offense now are doing a really good job of forcing corners to tackle, and especially in this Eagles scheme, you need to be able to tackle. So, when we talk about, some of these guys in the senior class, I look at Trayvon Diggs. We've talked about him. We talked about him earlier in the show. I did my notes on him in the scouting report. I believe it was last week. He's a guy that will come up and tackle. Two seniors that I think really kind of stand out in that area as well. Well, two Ohio State kids, I should say. Damon Arnett from Ohio State. This is a kid that will come downhill, very, very competitive, very scrappy player, will come downhill and make a stop in the flat. His teammate, he's not a senior, but Jeffrey Okudah will do some of the same. And look, we talked about it earlier with Ben. C.J. Henderson, I think, gets a lot of flack from a lot of people for missed tackles. Not a strength of his game. Not saying that he's the best tackler. He's not Antoine Winfield in his heyday. But I think when you look at his game overall, he'll come off the edge. He'll make plays in pursuit. He will come down and lay a hit as well in the flat when everything's lined up right. There are just a couple plays that look bad on film, and they look bad when you're watching on TV. So something he certainly needs to clean up. But when you look at the physical tools, a lot is there to work with a C.J. Henderson. This is a very good corner class overall. A lot of talent, whether it's the seniors, the juniors, the underclassmen that could declare for this draft, could really add to the depth. It could be a really good corner class here in 2020. All right, that'll do it. Great question there from David. Again, you can always go onto the show wherever you listen, leave a rating, leave a comment. You'll get it here on the show, and it's the best way to give us some support, help boost the podcast up in the rankings. All right, like I said, that'll do it. A great show here this week from everybody. Ben Fennell, Tony Pauline, Greg Cosell. Really appreciate everybody for joining the show, and I appreciate you guys for listening once again to the Journey to the Draft podcast.